Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. This is City Talk. YouTube, Facebook, MySpace, Google, the Huffington Post, myBarackObama.com, the Wired electorate, the Internet. Is it transforming American politics? Here to discuss the impact of the Internet, to separate the hype, the hope, and what's happening, is David Birdsell, the Dean of the School of Public Affairs at Baruch College. David has studied the impact of the Internet on American politics for more than a dozen years and is an expert on the workings and effects of the latest mobile and broadband technologies in the United States and abroad. Welcome back, David.
Good to be here.
We began looking at the Internet in 1996, the Dole Clinton campaign, and you really couldn't predict the massive impacts that the Internet has had on American politics. Give us a brief preview or review of what's happened over the last dozen years and where we are now.
Well, we have to start with the explosive growth of the online population. That's really where it all begins. When we began doing our work back in 1994, on the eve of the Netscape IPO, December of '94, you had about 850,000 people worldwide online. Clearly not enough to make a political impact. Most of them were engineers working in universities and in defense contracting agencies. Now you have upwards of 200 million people online just in the United States alone, and a substantial majority of the people who actually vote. Now that doesn't mean that those people are getting most of their information, much less all of their information online, but an ever larger percentage of increasingly politically committed people are looking first to the Internet, then to traditional media. And that's the cornerstone of the changes that we see.
Yeah, the ABC Facebook poll that was conducted in late January of 2007 shows that more people get their political information online than any news source except for TV, and it's beginning to exceed newspapers. So, but it's more than simply information that is transforming American politics and the use of Americans in terms of getting their political information. What else is going on?
Well, it's also the fulcrum for different kinds of participation in information itself and in the way that information is used and rebundled. One thing that many people thought is that the Internet would simply make it easier to read things that you could read elsewhere. And that is happening. And people do go and get their New York Times online. They do go and get the Washington Post online. But even that experience is different. You're seeing a report on Barack Obama, and you can click on a link and you can watch an Obama speech. After you watch the Obama speech, you could click on a link and go out to the Obama website. So there's a greater immediacy of the conduit between receiving information, choosing information, and then using that information to participate in politics. And that goes further when we start talking about social networking sites and other ways in which people become editors and participants in the phenomena they observe.
Okay, so you look at the presidential race in 2008, it seems impossible to understand the dynamics of this race without understanding the role of the Internet, particularly the phenomenal rise of the Obama campaign and the huge turnouts that we've seen. What's going on?
You see the Internet used as an organizational tool, so it's possible to reach literally tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people with a single email blast or a single post to a MySpace or a Facebook page to organize people to do things in particular areas. And that has proven, in fact, to send armies of door knockers, 5 figures strong, in Iowa early primaries, and that will continue to be important and has continued to be important even before we get to the fundraising aspects. And of course, one of the other things that this has done is vastly to extend the reach of fundraising arms and allow Barack Obama particularly to reach many, many people giving comparatively small donations, allowing him ceiling room as he looks to a general election campaign, as he looks to the remainder of the primary campaign. He can go back and tap people up to the 2,300 personal limit.
This seems to be a new paradigm. This is a paradigm busting, in a sense, campaign. And in a sense, the two Democratic candidates are on both sides of the paradigm. In a sense, Clinton represents the old paradigm, sort of the command and control, top-down type of campaign, even though they've used the internet successfully. In fact, she made her announcement on a YouTube video. Obama's campaign is different. In what ways is it different? Fundraising is one example.
Well, first of all, I'd like to pick up on the point that you just made, that it's not that Obama is online and other people are not.
Right.
Everybody's online right now. So the question is how well you use the tool and how pervasive it is so that it touches the other elements of the campaign.
Excellent.
To a certain extent, you can think of the web almost as a hub. I mean, you know, political advertising, for example, everybody does television political advertising if they have enough money to get in that game.
Right.
And some of the spots are well conceived and effective and well timed, and some of the spots are not on one or more of those dimensions. Likewise, your internet strategy can be well conceived and well timed, and it might not.
Right.
So think of it as a hub at one level. You can pump out new information. Your website can change every day. You can have a new message, a new theme, so it's not just a candidate who's on message, it's anybody who happens to traverse that website. But it's also a place to link to media coverage of the campaign. It's a place to put videos online that your supporters may be inclined to see. It's a place to link out to communities that have formed themselves in support of your campaign, and it's a place constantly to remind people that they have the opportunity to support your campaign financially. So it's a hub function in many respects that invites participation as well as information seeking. And in that sense, unlike, say, a television program, which is what it is no matter who you are, you as a user going into the website choose the channel, if you will, the click stream that makes sense to you and engages you. So it's inherently more attentive to the ways that individual users behave if it's intelligently designed. And I think that's where we see the difference that makes the Obama campaign rise above the rest in this election. You have better integration of tools on the site. You have...
And then, excuse me, just an interruption. The site was, in fact, partially developed by Chris Hughes, who developed Facebook. So Obama very early on was very aware of the potential of this new medium.
Absolutely. And that clarity on his campaign staff and on his own part has really helped him to use this. So that's been important. And if you look at those sites, they change very rapidly. It isn't so much, here's what I have to say to you. It is, look at all these wonderful things you're saying about these efforts. And it really pushes the locus of campaign enthusiasm out to the voters. One more important point here, and I think that this really bears mention with respect to Barack Obama particularly. His message of voter empowerment, you know, yes, we can, look at what you've done, we're not going to settle for the old politics anymore. The rhetoric matches the technology of the campaign. And you really, in that case, get that perfect storm, in a good sense for the Obama campaign, of a candidate who embodies and conveys a message that is consistent with the values and the structure of the technology.
Let's talk about the values and structure of the technology, but also the values of the generations. Winograd and Hayes, in their new book, Millennial Makeover, MySpace, YouTube, and the Future of American Politics, argue that we're entering a sixth realignment in American politics, and that previous realignments were the intersection of a generational change and technological change, and they say we're on the cusp of one of these realignments, and 2008 or 2012 is the critical election. Talk about this millennial generation and its values and attitudes and how it relates to the values and structure of the technology.
Well, a couple of things. First, I think it's eminently plausible that we are in this kind of realignment. Whether it's 08 or 12 is a hard question to answer. The millennials on whom so many of these
Let's
hopes
define it. Who are the millennials?
Well, that's a good question. You know, some people define it as the people born between 1980 and 2005, or 1985 and 2000.
Or 1982 and 2003. Some range.
But in any case, regardless of where you put that, one thing is very clear, is that there is a large chunk of millennials who are not yet legal-aged voters.
Right.
And that's important.
About half, according to the data.
And if we look at this in terms of, does this happen in 2008 or does it happen in 2012, your demographic analysis would suggest 2012.
Right.
So they're going to have to be pulling some X generation sentiment and maybe some trailing boomer sentiment as well if they're going to make that happen this season. But there's no question that we're seeing this technological shift, that we're seeing much more untethered communication through wireless telephones, through services over wireless phones, including all of the internet services that we're talking about, but additional services such as Twitter, very popular on the West Coast now, not so popular here.
Twitter?
Twitter is hard to describe. It's basically like a sort of walking blog, so that you can keep all of your friends apprised by a cell phone all at once of what you're doing. Now at the mall, and it goes to everybody in your address book rather than to one or two people, so you have this scaled social organization capacity and a larger audience for the record of your life that is popular with millennials, not so with boomers.
Right. And to a certain extent, being an old boomer, in fact, I don't get it. I don't get the willingness to expose one's life almost second by second to a larger universe out there. And that seems to be the phenomenon. It's very decentralized. It's very open. And what does this portend for politics, though?
I'm not sure that we know yet. One of the things that it portends for politics is, and if this holds up as a trend, if this is a characterization that follows millennials past their adolescent and teenage years and into their solid working adult years, and that's not clear yet.
Right.
And there's a lot of
some of this is hype and hope as well as what's really happening.
I think it's both. I think that you know, some of this we're looking at the way that people behave when they're very young. But at the same time, there are marked differences in the way that they behave now while very young from the way that past generations behaved even at that time. And that bears some attention. This interest in personal revelation, in posting your life online, in sharing the most mundane circumstances of life with many, many friends, extends to some expectation of reciprocity. And that, I think, is one of the first political impacts, that you trust people who are willing to share more about themselves. How that plays out is going to be very interesting.
So there's a transparency and openness, if you will, to this generation's values, and the technology allows them to do that or fosters it.
Authenticity measured by transparency and openness.
Okay.
Now remember, in terms of political attitudes, that this is the generation most likely to be supportive of full civil rights, including marriage rights for homosexuals. They are most likely to be supportive of freer immigration regulations. It's more of a libertarian mindset if we're to think of traditional terms in the way that you describe this. Another way to think about this in this revelation piece is that personal differences and orientations, peccadillos even, perhaps, become less salient if presented in an open and credible way. And it may change the conversation about the kind of clay statue model of candidate personal qualities that we have conveyed in recent years, although Governor Spitzer did a lot to try to knock that down for us in the last few seasons. But try to move away from that to something that's more genuinely revelatory. And there are long-term trends as we knock down various barriers, divorce, the wrong religious affiliation, past drug use, infidelity, that this sort of fits into that mix as ways that candidates may have options to present themselves.
given the traditional party structure and processes that exist now, it would seem as if that these changes and these values and attitudes would seem to benefit the Democratic Party, given its position stance on the issues. I would guess, and the surveys seem to suggest, that on most, if not all, issues, millennials hold more quote-unquote liberal and quote-unquote large D Democratic stances on issues?
Well, this really comes back to this question, is this a transformational election? On the basis of those issues, yes, you would think that that would overwhelmingly benefit Democrats, and it may in 2008.
Right.
Certainly the enthusiasm of the Obama campaign, and we have to give her due, enthusiasm for the Clinton campaign as well.
I mean, the turnout's been massively increased, and votes for both candidates exceeding total votes in entire caucuses and primaries.
Bucks County, Pennsylvania is a Democratic county now. And what a remarkable turn of events. And that owes to both of them in this case. But let's play this out a little bit, because we also know that the people who are pouring into this process on the younger end of the age spectrum are averse to party declarations to begin with. Tribal declarations short of party, yes, but party declarations in a formal sense, that's much less clear at this point. And this might be the stuff of transformation.
Okay.
You have new ways of expressing yourself politically and identifying yourself in media that insist in some ways foremost on identity, even if identity is hard to figure out. No one knows you're a Democrat online.
Also, the definition of tribe seems to change. The tribe is no longer socioeconomic or demographic as much as attitudinal and behavioral. The whole definition of one's tribe both has been expanded and changed dramatically.
Well, and it's more fluid. There are different kinds of markers. But remember, it's very easy to shift in and out. People are organized with one another in virtual communities where they may or may not ever have seen one another face to face. When we were developing our friend sets based on the people we walked across literally in any given day, it's very much harder to change those relationships. You see fewer people, you have fewer contacts. Now you might have several hundred Facebook friends. You didn't have several hundred friends in high school.
But the nature of the friends are different because of at the same time, it's very immediate and intimate. It's not at all personal in the sense of you and I talking to one another. So the quality of the friendship is different. What does that mean?
I wouldn't say more or less. I would just go with different at this point. But clearly, it's not that sort of obsessive one-on-one, this is you and me. This is instead something that is shared broadly with a wider range of people who are invited into an electronic space.
Okay.
And that can, of course, spill over into real life as well, as it must if we're going to get people into voting booths, as it must if we're going to get people to write checks or use PayPal or whatever mechanism that they use to contribute to campaigns, which demonstrably this year they're doing. And that's one of the differences here, too.
You know, being a political scientist and you being, you know, a political junkie and political expert, what about the internet and Federalist 10? Federalist 10 sets up this filtering process to control the effect of factions. And Madison argues that in the extensive republic, it'd be very difficult for majorities to coalesce and oppress minorities. Now, communication is instantaneous. Organization is ubiquitous. What happens to the American constitutional framework of the control of factions? I don't know if the founders would be very comfortable with what's going on with the internet.
I don't think the founders would own stock in Google at this point. And it would be a really scary thing for them. And in many respects, it's let 1,000 factions bloom. Let them live for a day or a week or a month or a year and then recoalesce into the new issues that excite the members of those factions for something else. But it's not faction in the sense that would have concerned Madison in some respects. It's not farmers over here and mercantilists over here and people running rum over here and what have have you. It's much, much more fluid and organized around social moments, around particular issues. Some of them may be durable issues like climate change,
right.
whichever side of this you're on will be with us for a very long while to come. But people move in and out of that. The salience rises and falls with news, or with whatever's happening in the news, and with whatever the candidates are framing themselves. So this is profoundly interactive in that sense, but hard to box into a rigid organizational structure.
Wow. What do you see? What's happening next? I mean, it's difficult. You know, there aren't too many crystal balls. We've seen, you know, the rise of, you know, the mobile communication, the broadband, the YouTube. What are people saying are the next step, or is it just one of these things that we're in this new territory and we just don't know?
Well, one thing that I would expect is that we will continue to see more miniaturization of mobile devices and more functions available on those mobile devices. Right now, in the U.S. anyway, it's pretty clunky still to get access to online video, to watch YouTube videos over your mobile phone. It can be done, and many people do it, and it's quite popular, but it's still slow. There was just a large broadband, a large spectrum auction, which will be used. Big portions of it were bought by Verizon, and big portions of it are going to be used to push out what's called fourth generation mobile services. And those mobile services, probably rolling out somewhere between 12 and 18 months from now, are going to make it much, much easier to access online video. So we're going to see continued development, and it's going to continue to particularize, meaning that now we can push everything out to the home in the kinds of quality and speeds that we're talking about. Soon you'll be able to push it out to your pocket and to everyone else's pocket at those speeds. What happens beyond that, I really don't know, and more people have made fools of themselves predicting it. But let me plunge into this.
Go ahead.
At some point, there's the information overload, which many people experience and which drives people from medium to medium. You talk to people who are in their early teens right now. They are not, by and large, email users, which boomers are.
No, they instant
massive.
Message.
IMs,
right.
Text messages.
Right.
I mean, but not something that is as old and clunky as an email message. Given that email only took off 10 years ago, that's a remarkable thing to say. But we'll see more of that. Why do people move away from emails? They take a long time. Spammers have figured out how to clutter your inbox with things you don't want to see. What you really want to do is contact your friends, and you want to do so in 160 characters or less. So you want something that's faster and shorter. Now, what happens when somebody figures out how to attach IM and text messages to the advertising revenue and the spam train? And at that stage, you then have movement off of these media as well. So there's competition here, and nobody has yet invented more hours in the day. There's competition for what you're doing with your fingers and your thumbs and your eyeballs during that period. And where that goes is anyone's guess. To a certain extent, is the competition between the security companies on the one hand, users on the other, and in the middle, the people who are trying to take advantage of monetizing that.
And you talked about Verizon owning pieces of this and the major corporate structures. It would seem that you've got a dual phenomenon going here. At the same time, you have radical decentralization of communication. You still have large privately owned or publicly owned companies owning these mechanisms, these tools. Does this continue to happen, and what impact does that have, that you have these central communications companies controlling these tools?
Well, corporate control in media is nothing new.
Right.
When we were, when you and I were kids, and we had the options of watching
and I was
3
a kid.
and only 3.
Right.
I needn't press that.
Okay.
But,
I remember when we owned when it went off at 11, and you had. Go ahead.
Still, we had, whenever it went on,
right.
we had a very limited range of things to look at, and every one of those companies was owned by a big corporation. Right. Same thing is true now, although the corporations that are producing a lot or controlling a lot of this conduit are in control of the conduit,
right,
and less in control of that marriage of conduit and programming,
okay,
which was true of television in the late 1950s
okay,
and 1960s.
So what you're saying is that the content can be dramatically different, even though the more immediate control of the conduit remains in the hands of corporate powers. But that the main thrust here is fairly dramatic decentralization here.
It's decentralization of the points from which news can be produced, and I'm using news in the absolute broadest sense. It could be campaign commentary, campaign videos, songs in favor of the candidates that you support, some of which are produced by comedy production companies, some of which are people with a video camera in their driveway.
And in fact, a lot of these homemade video in your driveway generate thousands, tens of thousands, and hundreds of thousands of viewers. And in fact, the campaign, particularly the Obama campaign, tends to adopt this, and it becomes part of the campaign. So the message out there is out there, and it is not necessarily centrally structured. So when you have the Obama girl or the Giuliani girl, you have, what, millions of viewers watching this, and then this becomes integrated into a larger campaign discussion?
Well, an Obama girl and Giuliani girl were, of course, corporate creatures in some respects. I mean, a production company that put them forward, and they're one kind of thing that happens, and it brings up the whole question about authenticity. You know, are these actually supporters? Who drives them online? Some of these videos are very clearly really garage efforts and single cameras, and nobody who wants to become famous through that vehicle could possibly have wanted to use that vehicle to make it happen.
Right.
But they nonetheless catch fire, sometimes for reasons that we can't fully describe. This gets back to some of the editing functions. You can't watch everything. There are millions upon millions of YouTube videos. Who chooses? What people try to look at is the sort of building joint consensus. You view it because many, many millions of other people have viewed it, so it becomes popular. At one level, that's outsourcing the editing function and letting the market decide, without a real editor to make those decisions.
And it has the constituencies really driving, in some ways, the discussion that is fairly unique in American political history, no?
Certainly the availability of the conduit.
Okay.
And this is really
you're
the
making
difference.
a distinction.
It's always been possible, or at least since the advent of electromagnetic tape, it's always been possible for you or for me to sit in front of a camera or a microphone and record our thoughts. But how do we share it with anybody? You know, we put it in a million cassette tapes and mail it around to friends. And remember, people used to do things like that, Christmas messages and that sort of thing. Well, that sounds awfully clunky. It's expensive. It can't go to more than a handful of people. Now you can actually make it available if people bother to look at it. And there's also a tier of what we would understand as more traditional editors, people who may be affiliated with a political movement. They may be affiliated with a point of view. They may be affiliated with a lifestyle, whatever it might be. But they go around and say, this is great. This is interesting for people like us. You'll love this. Look at the content. It gets the hits. And that might create stars in different areas, as has happened repeatedly on evangelical television with people who have, whether because they're humorists in the evangelical mold or because they have great sermonic capabilities, whatever it might be, rise through this kind of interlinking as editing.
Okay, last question, almost basically yes or no. This is revolutionary. The Internet and its use in both electoral politics and perhaps governance. There's no going back. The times, they are a-changing, if you will.
The times have changed. And I should point out that some of the things that we're seeing done so well by the Obama campaign were adumbrated in much earlier cycles. Pat Buchanan in the 90s used text-based email and a very plain text-based web page to organize volunteers in much the same way that Barack Obama is doing in a more sophisticated way with more sophisticated software tools. The difference is now it's a majority of Americans, a substantial majority.
So, to quote another song of the 60s, something's happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear.
But we'll know certainly by 2012, but I think we'll have a much clearer picture this year.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. Let us know what you think about this show. You can reach us at CUNY.TV. When you get there, click on the bar that says Contact Us and send your email. Whatever it is. Thanks, no thanks, obnoxious, do it. Send it.